Sunday Morning Matters.
Hey there, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us here. Another busy week, plenty of headlines to get to, of course, but I wanted to start today with a look at what was the tightest congressional primary here in the Central Valley. A longtime Congressman Jim Costa, a Democrat, finished just 6 points ahead of first-time Republican candidate Elizabeth Heng. It turned some heads, and it has many Valley Republicans thinking Heng might have what it takes to pull off a November upset. And Elizabeth Heng joining me now in studio. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Evan, thank you so much for having me here again.
Now, I hope it doesn't sound insulting to make the sound that people were surprised by these results, because it was a tight race. It was a good primary result for you. Was there any surprise on your behalf?
No, I really do appreciate the community coming out to support my candidacy. As I was walking around, knocking on doors, talking to constituents, they're looking for someone that's going to go fight for our valley here. And so I'm just excited for all the support and the momentum that the campaign has received going into November.
All right, so let's talk about that momentum. How has the campaign changed? How has your life changed since the primary night?
It's been nonstop.
A lot of phone calls.
In all honesty, yes, a lot of phone calls, a lot of attention both nationally and locally, and we're going to fight the good fight, because as we knocked on those doors, as we talked to constituents and voters, they're concerned about the things that are most impacting our communities, and that's the challenges that we've had with water, immigration, and education. So I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and fight the good fight, so I can go represent our community in January and on Capitol Hill.
Is there one issue that when you are going around knocking on doors that people do want to talk about more than others right now?
There's probably two.
Okay.
Water and immigration are the two topics that I constantly hear from voters and constituents.
A shocker, right?
Yes, it's their biggest concern right now.
So, I mean, well, when you talk about that, because, I mean, you're a Republican, you're coming from a conservative viewpoint, what is the message that they want to hear? I mean, water obviously is one thing. People tend to shade, I would say, more conservatively water-wise in the Valley. They might shade more left-leaning when it comes to immigration in many ways here in the Valley.
And
how do you line up that way yourself?
Yeah, so when I look at this, it's, and I mentioned this to you the last time we spoke of how we need an all-encompassing immigration policy that works for our community. Because currently right now, both Republicans and Democrats for far too long have punted this topic, right? When we even talk about DACA recipients, it's deferred action on childhood arrival. We deferred the action to provide them the security that they need. But we need to figure out how we can make this even work for our economy with a higher guest worker program for our farmers. And on top of that, we need to tie it to border and national security, so we're not having this discussion 10 years from now, and we fix immigration once and for all, because it is broken.
Right now in Washington, there's a lot of people trying to do that. I was just talking to David Valadao last week, and he's frustrated because he says, listen, I have exactly probably what you would want to do, but there's so many different extremes in Washington right now. There's a lot of people far right that see any sort of path to citizenship for anybody here, you know, without documentation as amnesty. Then you have other people on the other way that say, I'm not going to give a dime towards a new border wall or anything like that. So how do you cut through that in ways that Jim Costa can't right now, or hasn't been able to?
Look, I worked in Washington, D.C. on and off for 6 years on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and my job was to oversee, when we worked on legislation there, is to figure out how the game plan is structured, right? There's no books that tell you how Washington, D.C. operates. Here are, you know, the far right or the far left. Here are the lobbyists. Here are the special interests. How do you carve out those key components and individuals in order to finally come together and figure out a solution that works for everybody and negotiate that? If there's anything I'm happy about, we're having a discussion about immigration today. We haven't for decades now. It's broken, and it's gotten us to the point where it's been pretty contentious here for our community. But I am hopeful that we'll finally solve this once and for all so that we can find a common sense solution that works for us here.
Have you always been into politics? You were student body president at Stanford, right?
Yes, I was.
That was probably a different type of campaign.
It was, actually, no, it was like it's a microcosm of a congressional race because
Knocking on dorm room doors?
I didn't knock on as many dorm room doors, but I did leave literature in front of all of them.
Okay.
But on top of that, where I got my start in politics was actually here in the Valley. The American Legion Auxiliary sent me to Girls State as a representative for Sunnyside High School, and I didn't realize that I was that interested in politics, and I actually ran and became the Girls State Governor of California when I was a junior in high school.
That's interesting. Now, were you always conservative?
No.
Or did that change as you got older?
So
That's the old conservative joke, right? That they say, yeah.
So I used to be a Democrat,
Yeah.
and I did switch political affiliations to being a Republican.
When was that?
It was when the health care bill passed, actually. My whole life I was a Democrat, or at least I was a registered Democrat.
Okay.
But I believe I always had more conservative values. When I was at Girls State, it was the Tories and the Whigs, and I was a Tory. When I was in college, I would read Constitution book. I was in my constitutional classes, and I thought I'd be a Sandra Day O'Connor, but oftentimes I aligned with the dissents of Justice Scalia, for example. And it was not until, I think, when I worked in the private sector, opening up cellular franchises with my brothers, and I really saw how firsthand how government regulations stifled job creation, that I finally made that switch into being from Democrat to Republican.
And you guys, that business, I think, it got pretty big. It still is pretty big, right? The businesses that you started?
Yeah.
How many employees?
So, when I was working with them at the time, there was 75 employees.
Yeah.
Now the company has grown. I'm no longer with them, up to over 900.
It's interesting. So you were just featured in National Review. That's a popular conservative website for people who don't know. A lot of extra outside attention, extra outside money now coming in?
So,
I'm talking from outside the district?
So there's been a lot, from the district. I think the majority of fundraising that I have been either Central Valley or California in general, but I have been receiving both local and national support, yes.
How do you handle the President Trump question? Because obviously you get that a lot. I've already asked you about President Trump before. Are you a supporter of his? How do you feel about him? It's tricky for a conservative here in the Central Valley and California in general. How do you handle that? And how are you you are a supporter of the president, but I mean, like, how do you lay it out?
Yeah, I support the president. It is undeniable that our economy is doing better at an all-time high, that our unemployment is at an all-time low. However, I would say we are, although it's higher here in the Central Valley, we are better off where we are from an economic standpoint than where we were 2 years ago. However, what I would, and there's been policies such as the tax bill that I think has been good for our economy here, putting money in people's pockets. And what I would say to this is, I am my own woman. I will agree with the president when I do, and I won't when I won't.
The recent immigration stuff, the zero tolerance policy at the border, do you think that was a bad idea from the president?
When I saw the footage of families being torn apart at the border, it was heartbreaking. Yeah. But I do think that it's important that when we have refugees seeking asylum into the United States, that first we want to make sure that these children are safe. And we need to make sure that they're not being trafficked. And once we determine that, we need to bring the parents and the children back together immediately. But this goes to a bigger discussion that we need to have in our country, and that is border security, national security, tied to immigration that people have been punting for far too long. We need to figure out a fair process as we deal with asylums coming into the United States, and also for those who've been going through the legal process to become an American citizen for our country. And so if there's anything I'm happy about, we're having that discussion now because the system's broken.
It's a non-stop discussion, but yes, we are having it. Elizabeth Heng, she's running for Congress against Jim Costa in District 16. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
We appreciate it. Coming up, the city